For Victims and Villains, my name is Josh.
I'm Ashley.
And today we are talking about the biggest, the baddest in the world of table tennis. This is Marty Supreme. So Marty Supreme tells the story of a young table tennis player making his way through the ranks of the cutthroat world ping pong and the sacrifices he makes along the way. Now, general opinion wise, what are your general thoughts on this movie?
Really good movie overall. I was definitely surprised. I went in with some research. I more was looking at it from like the costuming perspective and how they stayed very authentically true to 1950s, which is about the time that the movie takes place. But also learning that Timothee Chalamet there was no stunt double. There were a couple times where they CGI'd in ping pong to get like the velocity of shots, but the fact that he trained beforehand makes it just feel really authentic and true, and you feel like you are watching 8 months of someone's life while they pursue their dreams.
I agree with a lot of that you had to say. For me, I think I look at this from like a perspective of how I've done a lot of the films here and how I handle a lot of the podcasts. I genuinely love this movie. I thought this movie was riveting from start to finish. This movie was funnier than I expected it to be. I don't ever remember any of the Safdie's previous films having any comedy in it whatsoever. Now, granted, a lot of this is dark comedy, which I thought was kind of like the jokes would hit, and then you'd be like, oh, fuck, can I actually like laugh at this? But this movie, I think, also fires on a lot of cylinders. This movie is 2.5 hours. The movie never feels like it's 2.5 hours. It's constantly moving at a really brisk pace that sets itself up literally right within the first, 5 minutes of this. I genuinely love this. And this movie also had, I loved the way that the anxiety hit. So if you've seen Good Time or Uncut Gems, you know how the Safdies typically do anxiety. It just feels like it's very heavy, and it just feels like it's just intense from start to finish. And this is not that way. I was really surprised by how the anxiety would kind of slow. It was more uncomfortable anxiety than it was actually anxiety.
I agree with the anxiety aspect. It's definitely not like the typical thing you would think of when you think of anxiety and anxiety attacks. It's a little more calculated. It's a little bit more of a slow roll, but I think in a way it did that to kind of piggyback and feed with this like concept of obsession. There's different levels of obsession from different characters in the movie, and I think that adds a little bit of a heightened, different kind of anxiety for the movie itself.
I think for me, one of the things that really stuck out to me is the score here by Daniel Lopatin, and I think it helps a lot of those more anxious-driven moments. You mentioned this film takes place in 1952. Timeline's a little bit murky. It kind of takes place roughly over a 9 to 10 month period, as you kind of see by the ending without getting into it. But Daniel's score here really helps because there's almost kind of this very synth heavy kind of vibe to it, to where it feels like it's 80s. I mean, this movie opens essentially is bookmarked by Tears for Fears, which I thought was a really interesting choice, but also helped really land some of those more anxious moments. And I think the use of synths made those anxious moments not feel quite so anxious up until we'll call it the grand climax of this movie that had me say, oh shit, quite a lot.
You mentioned a grand climax, and I think when you go see it, there are definitely bigger moments, but I would say it was kind of a up and down roller coaster of these small mini moments, victories, if you will. But it's, you know, it's still, for me, I wouldn't say there's any one moment. There's definitely stuff in there that connects from the beginning to make a bigger moment towards the end. But I would say almost if you take it scene by scene, there's even the smallest victories per scene. And if you look at it, that kind of is the whole thing. That's how professional sports work. It's all the little things first before you get into the grand victories.
I think that's one of those things that this film does really well. And for context, this is the first film that the Safdies kind of split off. So Benny Safdie directed Smashing Machine earlier this year. This is Josh Safdie's picture, and he does an incredible job. He's one of the co-writers on this. The script here is incredible. The direction here is phenomenal. But I think the way that on the mark of direction, I think one of the things that this film does incredibly well is the way that Josh Safdie is able to make you feel like the room is getting smaller the closer you get to the credits. When we talk about anxiety and talking about how these elements connect literally throughout the course of the film, it is not only the course of the acting or the directing, but it is the way that the all of those things kind of work intangibly with one another.
You talked about the directorial aspect of it. Talking on the producer side of it, Chalamet produced this. The amount of love, the amount of research that he puts into creating the character Marty Mauser, who is actually loosely inspired by Marty Raisman, who was an American, a world victorious table tennis player back in the 50s, and kind of really put table tennis on the map to becoming something bigger, to now today tabletop tennis is an actual Olympic sport.
I don't know how we've gone this long and haven't actually talked about Chalamet. This is the first performance I've seen this year from any actor, this kind of award season, if you will, that I'm like, I will be damned if this guy does not win. And I feel like this is not only one of the best performances of the year, I feel like this is probably going to be a career-defining performance for Chalamet. He walks this line between charisma and just asshole really, really well, but also is like has these like really tender moments, especially towards the end of the film, where I think there is sincerity behind it, you can say, but also I think one of the things that Chalamet's performance does really well is whether or not you can actually trust Marty throughout the course of this film. I feel like he did that really well. And also the idea and the concept of making Mr. Wonderful Kevin O'Leary the villain in this movie was incredible. Gwyneth Paltrow's performance in this movie, I feel like, is kind of like the I could take it or leave it type of deal, but Odessa A'zion she's a knockout performance in this movie as well. And also Tyler, the creator's in this movie, very small part, very memorable, very standout.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting Kevin O'Leary. Everything that I had looked into was like Gwyneth Paltrow was supposed to be the villain, and like she definitely has a little bit of a villain arc. Just a tiny bit. So I will say, if you're looking for some big bad Gwyneth Paltrow to come in and steal the story, that doesn't really happen. There are moments where I'd say Kevin O'Leary's character kind of steals the narrative, but that has to happen. It's part of Marty's character arc. You didn't know who Kevin O'Leary was in the first place, so the fact that he is playing a pretty like wealthy entrepreneur inventor, he's really just playing himself, like where you would see him on Shark Tank. But the performances are just absolutely incredible, and I would not be surprised if Chalamet ends up with multiple awards for this, because he has a way of making you, even though you're watching it, you almost feel like you're there and you're living this life alongside Marty. But Chalamet really, 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 his character just kind of leads you alongside with that anxiety, with those fears, with that isolation, with the obsession. And you don't know whether you should root for him or slap him across the face. I mean, it is such a powerful, emotional, like full body experience almost, just like watching the film. It is a very, very well done movie.
That's a great segue into our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Marty Supreme a 4.5 out of 5.
I think I'm with you on that 4.5.
This movie does a lot of things right. I think this movie has a incredible pace to it. Score is incredible. Costuming design is phenomenal. Performances across the board are very well done. There are just some of the story elements I felt like didn't necessarily belong or held the movie back from its full potential. But again, Chalamet in this is a tour de force.
It is definitely a go to the restroom beforehand. Don't leave the movie. If you leave any second of the movie, you will not understand what's going on. That is how fast the pace is and how it moves along.
Marty Supreme is now playing in theaters everywhere from A24. But let's talk about mental health, shall we? If you guys are new to our content here at Victims and Villains, we create content like what you're watching right now simply to talk about how mental health can be taken out of the films which we're reviewing in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. This movie speaks volumes when it comes to mental health from multiple character perspectives, whether you're talking about Chalamet's Marty or his love interest, Odessa A'zion. But I think this film, the driving force of this film from a mental health perspective, is kind of almost this cautionary tale of obsession and how toxic it is for our mental health.
Also, I think arrogance leading to isolation is a big, big theme for this movie as well.
I think those things honestly feed into one another really beautifully and really spectacularly. I think they speak as almost as a cautionary tale of how obsession can create things like isolation and desperation and really ultimately impact not only your own mental health and your own self-worth, but also those around you. And I think the relationship between Marty and Rachel in this film is proof of that. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, please click the links in our show notes below to check out our mental health resource library. Once again, Marty Supreme is now playing in theaters everywhere from A24. In the show notes below, you guys will find links to more movie reviews like this, podcasts from our podcast network, all of our social media, our mental health resource library, and that follow button. So until next time, remember to keep it classy, keep it supreme.